brought to you in part by Howard Products. Since 1969, Howard Products has made a wide range of polishes and wood finish restorers. Their hit products, such as Restore Finish and Feed and Wax, have been used in the vintage audio industry for decades, enabling vintage audio enthusiasts to keep their equipment looking as good as they sound. If you want to find out more about Howard Products or to take a look at their product range to see what you can use to bring your equipment back to life, check out www.howardproducts.com. Welcome to this next episode of the Vintage Series podcast here on eCoustics.com. I'm your moderator, Mitch Anderson from Black Circle Radio, and our hosts for this series, we have Jeremy Sikora at Budget Audiofiler and Eric Pye at Audiolove YYC. So we're 4 episodes in now to this series, guys. How are you feeling about how the conversation is going thus far?
We're having a blast.
We're talking about what we love, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this episode, we've covered speakers and we've covered amplifiers. We got many more to come. But this episode in particular is about one of the formats that's near and dear to me, and that is reel-to-reels. They're as close to, I think, like magic as audio comes. Just the way that it's the magnetics and it's capturing all of those sound waves, the physical sound waves in that way. And then the playback is surreal to me. It is a totally different listening experience than a vinyl record or a CD or streaming. And I personally feel they all have, their intricacies, but reels, I think that they've got a different mojo going on. And Jeremy, I see one behind you right there. What do you have going on the deck?
So right behind me, this is a TAC X1000R. And that is my daily in the office back here.
And then behind me here is there it is. I got the 7-inch reels on it right now. But that's the X2000 R, the big brother. Have you ever used the R, like the reverse mode for that
all the
deck?
time?
What are you using it for?
More music.
What do you mean?
So these reels play. It plays all the way through, and then it plays the other direction
without having to flip the tape.
Correct.
So it's basically like a 4-track,
yes,
but it only plays 2 at a time.
Yes, exactly that. So that is the R in the TAC naming convention. I've had several reel-to-reels, and I find that this is by far just the easiest. You don't flip the reels. You don't do anything with the reels.
I think that it's, and like the sound that comes off of those decks, I think is just superb. I don't know what's going on inside it, but man alive, does it sound great.
Yeah. So I was drawn to these just because it looked like something you shouldn't have inside your house. It looked like something mechanical. It looked like something you'd see in an audio lab. And we saw some on the local offer up. So we ended up buying 3 of them, and in a box of 7-inch reels, and the owner, it was actually the son of the previous owner, and he's like, I have no idea whether or not these work. So we asked him, do you know how to work them? And he's like, no, I don't either. So we brought them home, cleaned them up, got on YouTube, looked at how these things work. We looked at downloaded the manuals for them, actually did some reading. And within that afternoon, we had 2 of the 3 reel-to-reels working.
Oh, wow. So what kind of stuff were you doing to them?
Well, general cleanup. These were actually being used. So the belts weren't gummed up, and we just had to learn how to use them.
Right.
And once we figured out how to properly thread, 2 things: how to properly thread the reel to reel, which is something that somebody either has to show you, or you just read the manual, and that reels have the actual tape has two sides to it, one that records and one that does not. You can make that mistake the old fashioned way, thinking you have a broken one, but yeah, there's a definitely something like that you'll have to learn. So general cleaning, buttons, controls, if they've been sitting for a while, then most likely belts.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I actually got the one that is sitting behind me. It sat for a long time, so I got it for very cheap. And when it was sorted out and the head was realigned, he's like, the belt was in there for probably 20 years and it was just mush. So took him probably an hour to just clean it all out, put a new belt on, and it was as good as new.
Don't you have some like photos or maybe even videos on the Budget Audiofiler page of you having one of those machines apart?
Yes. We are infamous for taking machines apart in the living room, and that riles people up about messing up the carpet. But you really can't destroy an Oriental rug, so be it. But yeah, there's lots of screws, lots of pictures,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
lots of alcohol swabs, not just alcohol swabs.
Alcohol.
Yeah. And a lot of cleaning. But it's interesting because they are so mechanical, especially the older ones. So you get into the later ones, you actually have digital readouts, but when you stick to the older ones, you can actually see the button push and follow it, and to see if it's hung up, to see if it needs lubrication. So those are somewhat easier to work on with even just a basic understanding and a basic curiosity. So we bought a whole bunch of these just to take them apart to see, hey, we bought 3 of them. Maybe we can get one working. We ended up getting 2 working, and then we ultimately got the 3rd one working a while ago after that. But out of those, one was sold fully functioning. The other one is next door fully functioning. And the 3rd one, I don't know, I think it's in a garage somewhere, but those were all 7-inch ones. So
Okay. Yep.
very common to start with, very common to get cheaper once you get into the 10.5. And I know, Mitch, you'll get into the professional side of all of this. Then it kind of goes a different direction budget wise.
Yeah. And Eric, before we jump into more conversation about these reels, you know, I know that you don't have one, but what do you have, like, any questions about the format, or like, have you used one or been around them before to soak them in? I mean, that we were at the show in Long Beach.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. I mean, that was my second experience of reel to reel. The first the first experience of reel to reel was in my first year at university, when a couple of guys down the hall in my residence had one, and we had an interesting evening one night where they decided to do a certain kind of drug. And I was the only person who did not do any drugs. And so I was nominated the recorder, and we were going to make this wild recording of the whole evening called Creative Drugs. And so these guys popped, and, you know, I sat there and I operated the machine. And then, you know, it got late and everyone went to bed. And the next morning we gathered with great excitement to listen to Creative Drugs. And I already knew that it was crap, but they didn't. And the look on their faces as we listened to just, well, very long periods of actual silence, and then other periods of just stupid conversation. It was rather humorous. So that was my first experience. My second experience was at the show in Long Beach, where I don't remember the name of the guy, but who had inherited original master tapes from his father. And I think he and his brother, they split the different genres. And anyways, he played a few really, really cool things. I remember, Mitch, you commenting on the way that he had his equipment set up. But even with the poor setup, I found those tapes to sound pretty damn amazing.
Yeah.
And I know, you're going to talk about it from the recording standpoint, but I mean, that's what you're using in recording, right? And that's what like Kevin Gray is using with Tone Poets, and the other great remasterers are using when they make their great reissues. And so I can only imagine, like the quality of stuff that's coming off those tapes. Because I mean, they're using that as the source for the vinyl, which in turn is
Right.
going to sound really, really good, but you're always going to have some kind of drop off. So you got to know that first stage is going to sound pretty damn amazing.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think it's really cool that you shared that story too, that your first time with a real, like you were the engineer.
Yeah, basically.
Isn't that amazing?
In a very simple setup.
Yeah, that's because it's also cool too, because one thing I definitely wanted to talk about within reel-to-reels is that the preamps, the microphone pre's in them are incredible sounding. They are very high quality. I use them all the time. So even if like the record or the playback function of the deck doesn't work, but if your mic input and your line output works, then you've got a great gain stage.
So you
and
can just bypass the actual reel-to-reel and use it as kind of a preamp.
So if you can put it in like record mode, and so even if your heads don't work, you can still put it in record mode, and it'll bypass, and it's kind of like a true bypass type of. You can still get the signal flow, right, and you can get the gain staging. And I find that incredible because they're so creative, and they're the majority of the time they're a high Z microphone style, where your normal like SM58 or whatever is a low output, a low impedance microphone source, but a high Z is like a guitar or a bass output. And so that's what these microphones are. And so there's a different tonal characteristic. And when you get them into the real preamp, you can just do cool things with it. DIing a bass into those things sounds just stunning too. And so from a recording standpoint, if you're into vintage audio and you have a guitar laying around and you want to know what a reel sounds like, and you've got some digital interface of some sort, you've got a really high quality preamp sitting right next to you. And so to use as a creative tool, which is, I think, something that gets kind of like grazed over a lot. But I like that part about them quite a bit, truthfully. I had a question for, you brought up Kevin Gray, Eric, and I messaged him in a tizzy one day, and I'm like, man, I don't know what's going on. And I was like, Kevin, how you can see on the tape like where the tracks kind of start and stop. And he's like, no, you can't. He's like, what do you mean? It's magnetic. Like you can't see it. And it was it was just like complete coincidence that when you have a reel-to-reel and you've thread the tape through, and everything's rolling, right? There's just small variances, like if you're looking at the front of the reel, where the tape can go back or forth, and it just creates these really small like ridges, I guess, almost like it just looks
like a
uneven.
mark on an album or something, right?
Yeah, similar to that, right? Yep, like a groove. Yep. And the way that the track lined up, those ridges just happen to start and stop at the beginning of the track. And so if you do have, what I'm getting at with this is, if you're playing a tape, and you're like new to reel-to-reels, and you see those ridges as it's playing, that's not something you need to be really concerned about. I mean, if you're having a section of your tape that's sitting back like, an eighth of an inch, then you might need to take a look at, are your heads like, or is your reel tight enough? Is it too, is it wobbling back and forth? Because then you get playback issues, and you could have problems doing that stuff long term. But I thought that was something that really struck me. I was like, oh, I hope I didn't screw something up. This isn't my reel, that kind of stuff. But it was something to not be concerned about. And I also learned you can't see magnetism on the tape. So, and that was, like 8 months ago. It's a constant learning process, right? But the reason I love those reels so much is like Jeremy, you said, they're very mechanical. The concentration portion of using them, I find very attractive, and it spins at that that IPS. Whether you're going at 7.5, or if you're going at 3.25, which is what you would most normally find on a high or low speed on a consumer reel. Is going to be your 7.5 or your 3.25, and those are. I think it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Those settings sound great, and you're not really going to normally need like a 15 IPS or a 30 inches per second machine for normal use. Jeremy, does your deck peak out? Is your max speed at 7.5? That's what mine is.
The one behind me is 7.5, and I had one that did 15. It was a Fostex. But it was a 7-inch, and what was interesting about that is you could put basically a song. So just to kind of explain the difference is those are just 3 different recording speeds, and Correct. They use different amounts of tape. And what it boils down to is how much music do you want to put on your reel, and then there's kind of a balance with the sound quality.
So it's basically like the difference between a 33 and a 45 on a vinyl.
Yep.
In terms of A, how much you can fit on, and B, what the sound quality difference is going to be like.
Correct. So if you're recording something original, it's going to be 15 or 30. If you're playback, then 7.5 is just fine. I've had people say, well, 3 is like voice quality, and that's what you want to get if you're recording something like this. But 7.5 is kind of where it's at, music wise. It's a great balance of sound and space.
So Jeremy, I have a question for you. I'm curious, what do you use your reel-to-reel for? Because you said earlier that you use it for like playback at work. Like, so are you recording stuff onto that and then playing it back, or are you buying original tapes, or what's the story there?
Excellent question. So I get that an awful lot, because I think a lot of people are under the impression that I'm running around trying to find original reel-to-reels and then buy them. They are out there. They are pricey, and most likely they've been played quite a bit, and they may be degraded. So what I started with was just re-recording over other reels that somebody gave me. But now I've gone into actually new tape and then making my own. So I could record a full album. I could record something live. But what I find myself using the most is just making a good old-fashioned mix tape.
And how long are you getting on one of those? Like, how long would your mixtape be? Because I'm used to like a 90-minute cassette mixtape. I'm assuming you can get a bit longer on those.
Yeah, you can get. The last time I made a full one, Mitch, is it around 45 at 7.5?
I truthfully don't have the answer, man. I know that my father-in-law's record, he did that on a new ATR magnetics tape. And I think he did it on his Pioneer deck. It's how he's recorded all his music since whenever he got that. long time, a lot of songs on that machine. But I think that he can normally get, I would say right around that 45 minute. I think that he's probably, I don't know if he's pushed 50 minutes on a record with it. But I would assume he probably has. I mean, if you're running at 3.5, if you're running at 3.25, then for sure. I mean,
you're
going
gonna
to
absolutely get that. Yeah.
Probably around 45 minutes. I think that's a good guess.
side,
We can be called. We can be called out. That's
So
fine.
it's like album length, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say roughly a little longer, though. I think there's more wiggle room than maybe 45 minutes. I could be blowing smoke, but I don't think I can. But yeah, I think you're right on that, Jeremy. One of the parts that I find interesting with reel-to-reels as well is the when it comes to the heads. If you have a machine, say you picked one up, right, and everything looks good, and you took it to a tech, and they're like, hey, we just replaced the capacitors in the power section, and everything looks pretty sweet. But then you're normally you would get a measurement of the head life, and how much is how much time is left for your playback and record heads. And there's I think there's only one company that comes to mind, that's JRF Magnetics, that does a process that's called relapping the heads. And essentially what they do is you can either send in the machine, or a lot of times you would just remove the heads from the machine and send them just the heads. But they would bring the heads to 100% life, based on how much of the head is usable. So you'd be like at 100% of 85%. You know what I'm kind of getting at with that?
Is that like remagnetizing a speaker driver then, or like
it's actually like it's more of a like a really fine grit sandpaper process, where the heads over time, with that tape like constantly running through it, they're grinding away at the head. And when the tape is on the reel, it's like I mentioned, those kind of hills and valleys where things don't line up 100% correct. Well, if it's not lined up correct on your heads, then it's also going to make the head like waver a little bit, and so over time it wears that down. So they bring everything to uniform, where there's no like, what do you want, like 9-degree slope difference on the outside of the head compared to the inside of the head. And they measure all that and then bring it in to do it. But I don't know, they're the company that comes to mind. I know I've seen some threads and stuff where people do it themselves. And I think that would be really interesting to do, because I think the process, like Jeremy, you've spoken about reconing speakers. And there's definitely an art to it. But if you had a deck that you wanted to try, that you picked up at a yard, like, maybe like an old Roberts, or an old Akai, or something that was really beat up, and you got it for like next to nothing, I feel like relapping is something that you could try as a DIY tinkerer type thing, because there's tutorials out there for it.
Have you done any of that kind of stuff, Jeremy? Like, have you changed heads or
no?
cleaned,
I have been lucky to kind of look at, actually, and this is something that I would kind of recommend is get a good look at the head if you're going into buying one. And if you can see physical damage, then if you want a project, then take it. But
hard.
If not, that's not something that you want to go that into.
Unless you're using it unless you're a musician, you want to use the preamps.
Yeah.
The other thing that I use all the time for taking care of my machine is I really like those long, what like Q-tips with the long wooden handle on it. Those I think work a lot better than the standard double-ended Q-tip for cleaning the heads. And then denatured alcohol is what I use for head cleaning. And the amount of gunk that comes off those things is insane, and it comes out black. Like, it's like, oh baby, it was this dirty. And there is a sonic difference. I mean, just if keeping your, I don't know, I clean the machine, I clean the heads anyway multiple times in any like mastering session, or anytime I'm transferring or archiving off of it. I clean it quite a bit. Is that the same kind of method you use, Jeremy, for cleaning? Do you use denatured alcohol with it?
Yeah.
Pretty. I think that's kind of the only way to go with them. And there's a whole bunch of different machines you can get to that are out there anyways, that do all different types of stuff. I know that the TX are pretty common to find, and they've, there's 4-track machines, and one of the coolest ones, I've had one of them. Our guitar player has one right now, but it's a 388, Tascam 388, and that's an 8-channel mixer that is built into a reel-to-reel machine, and they're gorgeous. They're big. They're like a desktop console looking thing. Those are really neat machines, and that one records at 7.5. But as far as, I mean, you get the 1-inch, you get the 1/4-inch, you get the 1/2 inch, and the 2-inch different tape sizes. And the majority of time when you're going to be hearing playback, you're going to be hearing it on 1/4-inch tape. The 1/2 inch, 1-inch, and 2-inch is more for like studio recording, or even mastering is normally done on 1/4-inch. A lot of times 2-inch tape is normally done on 24-track machines for recording and mixing, within a 1/4-inch dump down deck, because you still got to get all that information down to 2 channels, right? And so I just find the whole art of them, and the nuances and frustrations and creativity that comes with them is so cool. Into the tape delays, you can do really neat tricks and fun experiments with them, by like adjusting the tape and pulling it farther out, where if you have like a little something to, like almost like a pulley, I guess, but if you stretch the tape and you're going back and forth with it, you can do different types of tape delays, and all sorts of time augmentation with the audio for creative expression. And it's a ride for me, but the playback of them is just killer. I really enjoy, especially in the holidays. I've got this box set. It's like 12 reels, and I think they're 10.5. Yeah, they're 10.5s. And it's just Christmas music. It's like 10.5-inch reels at 3 1/4 speed. And so you're just listening to Christmas music off this thing like nonstop. But I think that part is cool too, to be able to have the playback at 3.5 and have a full 10.5-inch tape at 3.5. It sounds great, and you just press play, and it just goes for so long.
It's forever.
Yeah, I love that. I really think it's cool with no commercials,
Yeah. One of the cool things I find about reel to reel, you were talking about effects and stuff. Like, I find it so cool that, so Tio, I think his name Tio Macero, or whatever, the guy who mixed a lot of Miles Davis's early 70s fusion stuff.
Okay.
He basically, most of the music on those albums is his work as opposed to the band's work, because he was chopping and splicing those tapes like there's no tomorrow, and creating all these effects. And it's really cool, because then so in a silent way, I think there may have been some of that work. I know that there was a lot of it on like Bitches Brew and stuff like that. But in a silent way, there was a remix of that done by Bill Laswell, like
Okay.
in the 1990s, I think, where he basically turned it into a dub album. And that, again, I think a lot of that was tape effects, and I just find that really fast. I wouldn't have the first clue about how to do any of it, but just the fact that they were able to do all that and kind of make music almost like a musician as opposed to as an engineer, that just blows my mind.
Yeah, it is an instrument. I definitely think that it is a special piece of equipment where it does do both, because you can play them. I mean,
Yeah.
not just have playback, but you can play the reels too.
Mhm.
It's very, very cool.
Mm.
Jeremy, do you have any final kind of thoughts on anybody looking to get into a reel, or that is intrigued by, or questions that you've been asked that you want to address?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things we saw when we were at the show is there were more than one room that had reel to reels.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about vintage equipment that Eric and I were looking all around for during that show, we saw two things. We saw reel to reels and we saw vacuum tubes. So those are very much a thing in both vintage and modern. So having either a restored, updated reel to reel is just as much a part of a vintage system as a brand new system. So
Absolutely.
the 7-inch ones are really easy to get into price wise. If you like them, then you can upgrade. So it's just a neat thing to have. The sound is, as you said, incredible. It's different. You can hone it in. You can put Christmas music on there. You can put Radiohead on there. You can put whatever you want, and somebody can be like, "Why? I didn't know Radiohead released that on reel." I'm like, they didn't. But it's very, very easy to just learn the recording. It's fun. It definitely gets a lot of eyes on it when you actually see both of them going. So it's neat. There's definitely a place for them. And just to confirm that time on these 10-inch, you're talking 90 minutes. So you can get a solid 90 minutes of playback, and even more if you go to the lower IPSs.
And is that using the reverse function, or is that just playing one way?
I believe that's both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So
Cool.
you were spot on with the 45 minutes. Yeah,
Yes.
that's good. Yeah,
45 to
that's
60.
cool.
Yeah.
Before we do, it's not very often I get to talk at length about reels to a captive audience. Believe it or not.
Uh-huh.
But one thing that I did want to bring up with reel-to-reel machines too, which I find really, pun intended, cool, is that they're kind of like the OG when it comes to audiophile playback. I mean, you've got your wire recorders and you've got your wax cylinders and all this kind of stuff, right? But the reel-to-reel, it is hi-fi in my opinion.
It is.
And so something I find fascinating is that Archval and I've got just a bunch of different reels that we use for different stuff, but quite a few of those reels are vacuum tube. And so I have one vacuum tube reel here in Source West, but and it's a old Roberts, and it actually has an 8-track in it too, but it is tube. It's like one of the oddest like culminations of whatever eras, but I think that is fascinating to me, where it went through all the stages of technology, just like receivers and amplifiers did. But this thing was made for recording and for playback. And when they were advertised as portable at the time,
Yeah.
these things weigh, the older Crowns are the ones I'm specifically talking about, the tube Crown ones, and they weigh 60, 70 pounds. There might as well be like a Fender twin amplifier. They're huge. But man, the sound is awesome. And some of those some of the transports don't translate well to modern era, where they're just clunky and they eat tape and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really special that we're still able to use and enjoy a medium that has been around for so long in so many different ways like that. I find fascinating. So, oh, and if your tape is shedding, you can bake tape too, and to kind of tighten it up, because you don't want moisture getting into your tape. So if it's shedding as it's going through the heads, you can bake them in a in like a convection oven for like low heat for like a longer amount of time, and it'll tighten, get all the moisture out of the heads without demagnetizing it. So that's a part of the archive process that I think is fantastic too. I don't think that the material that the tape was made with would pass certain environmental standards, nowadays, but it does stand the test of time for this music. So, man, thank you both for letting me be a part of this conversation. I've been really looking forward to it.
That was fun.
So, yeah.
Always.
Thank you, Jeremy, Sikora, Budget Audiophile, or thank you, Eric Pye at Audio Love YYC. I've been your moderator, Mitch Anderson, for this conversation about reel-to-reels, and I'm grateful for it. This is the eCoustics podcast vintage series, and we got more coming. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, share around. Let us know what you think. See you on the next one.